Hello everyone, I'm Mariela Condorena and welcome to today's webinar. This is our last webinar. And before we started, we are going to invite you to follow us to our network. On Facebook, we have more than 8,000 members. Maybe you can join us on WhatsApp or visit our YouTube channel and you can subscribe here and visit our Google site. You can visit our new channels too, as Twitter and TikTok. Welcome again to our Crash webinars. Now, please type your questions in the comments section. The answer to your questions and comments will be replied by our guest speaker at the end of the webinar in the question time section. And then when finishing the webinar, remember, this is the last webinar, so it's important that you have to pay attention to this webinar because it's so interesting too. So when finishing the webinar, because I have some problems with my internet connection. And you know, we are teachers. It happens sometimes. Now, continue with this, please, with the next. It's time to know our guest speaker. Please, Miss Sulamita, could you introduce him, please?
Sure. Thank you, Miss Mariela Condorena. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our last Crash webinar of our community English teachers in Peru. It's a pleasure and honor for me to introduce our guest speaker for today. This is Leonardo Mercado. Leo is originally from Queens, New York, and he has been into the educational field for more than 25 years. As a language program administrator, he has worked as an academic coordinator, academic branch manager, project manager, test center administrator, and director of studies. Over the years, he has led large-scale projects to create and implement diverse e-learning platforms, as well as several nationwide projects with Peru's Ministry of Education and other entities. His most notable accomplishments include a successful international accreditation process with the CEA, along with a successful preliminary inspection with equals. He is now an entrepreneur who is heading his own professional consultancy firm, NYC Learning Solutions. As a speaker, he has presented at national and international conferences in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and most of Latin America, including TESOL International, IAT EFL, Equals, MEX TESOL, and ABLA. As an author or co-author, he has numerous international publications. Leo holds a master's degree in education with a specialization in curriculum and instruction from the University of Phoenix. He also holds an executive MBA with a specialization in project management from the New York Institute of Technology. His main interests include technology for the language classroom, language assessment, teacher education and professional development, international accreditation, and ESLA research. Today, he's going to present a webinar titled The Do's and Don'ts of ELT, looking at the research and best practices. Mr. Mercado, thank you for accepting our...
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much, Sulamita. It's my honor. The honor is all mine to be here with you this afternoon, this lovely afternoon, and with all of the audience. And certainly, as always, it's a pleasure to be in a position to contribute in any possible way to English teachers in Peru, which is doing such a valuable job, an important job in Peru, advancing the field. So yeah, I'm here to talk about the do's and don'ts of ELT, looking at the research and best practices. And so essentially what I'd like to deal with is finding the main, okay, so let me try to share here. Okay, there we go. And we will move to the presentation. I hope everyone can see that. Just to make sure, technology sometimes can be a little unreliable in certain cases. I see the thumbs up, a lot of thumbs up from Carlis and Vilma and Liz and Jesse. Excellent. So great. So here we are. So let's begin. We're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of ELT. We're going to look at those factors which have a decisive impact on the success of the teaching and learning in the classroom, whether it be virtual or whether it be face-to-face. And we're going to look at what we need to do to succeed. We're going to look at a simple framework that will allow us to find that route to success a little more easily. And then we're going to look at different kinds of situations and cases in which challenges are involved and how we can deal with those challenges through effective reasoning. Now, the reasoning will also apply, as we will see, to our post-observation conferences, those wonderful meetings that we have with our coordinators, and of course, the international exams that deal with teaching and learning. So we're going to link all of them together, and that will be quite clear by the end of the session, which is my goal for today. And my goal is to make this as helpful to you as possible. So let us begin. We have a lot to cover. So welcome to the session. I mentioned we're going to look at foundations in terms of principles and concepts. We're going to focus on what is directly applicable in terms of what we do in class and how we work with our students. And then we'll look at how we can deal with standardized assessments. So let's start with the principles and concepts. Certainly our goal is to make sure that our students are as happy as possible, that they're participating as much as we can see in the picture, that we're smiling as well, because we also want to be happy when we're working with our students, right? So motivation is important for the learner, but it's also very important for the teacher as well. So all of us have to be motivated and happy if the learning process is to succeed. Don't you agree? So we want to feel just as good when we go to work and we go and meet with our students as well, just like they should be as happy to see us and to see their peers. Okay, so how do we achieve success? One of the things I'd like to propose this afternoon is something quite simple. And I see Kelly is here, Roxana Cortez, I've seen that name before. Lovey and Elena, welcome everybody, come on in, join us. How do we achieve success? I'd like to propose a simple framework, which is easy to remember, the please framework. So you know that please is to ask for permission, but it is also a verb which is synonymous with making another person or another group of people happy. So the please framework has to do with making our students happy. We want to please our students. And we want to make sure that they're motivated each and every time they come to class. But we also want to please ourselves because we want to be happy when we succeed. We want to be happy when we see everybody else is happy. And we want to be happy when we see that the class has achieved its goals and that the learning outcomes substantiate all of the efforts that everyone has made during the lesson. So what does the please framework consist of? Well, first, planning. Then we're looking at learning outcomes, and I'm going to deal with each one in a little more detail over the next few minutes. Engagement. So these are elements that we have to see in our classes or as we're putting together our lessons, and then as we are executing them and then evaluating them later. So planning, learning outcomes, and you'll notice that I'm using the term learning outcomes and not so much learning objectives. Engagement, aim or purpose. Now that in particular, that term aim or aims is enormously important, and you're going to see why over the next few minutes. Support, and of course, to evaluate, right? To evaluate everything. So let's take a look and see what we're talking about here specifically. Number one, planning. This is where we are looking at the decision-making process. So we have to make decisions, and we first have to be, before we can bring about successful classes, we have to identify the criteria for success. How do we determine if our class was successful or not? Okay. Second, what are the factors that will affect or will have an impact on whether those criteria are met or whether our class succeeds or not? Third, what is the probability of success? How can we maximize the chances that our students will succeed, and so will we? Fourth, how do we avert disaster? How can we provide for contingencies? What are our plan Bs and Cs in case something goes wrong? Because as we know, life is not perfect and not everything goes according to plan all the time. So what are we going to do in those situations? We must know. And of course, the reason I put POC there, an exam, is when you are planning your lesson, this whole notion of lesson planning and how it has an impact on success is accounted for in our post-observation conferences. When a coordinator visits us, we have to be able to deal with the whole planning process and explain it. What went into our thinking when we were planning for our lesson. And another point, as you can see, the word exam is there. Many different exams, including the ministry exams, as well as international exams like the TKT, account for planning as well in their content. So that's why it's very important for us to know how to deal with planning and what is the impact it has on the learning process. Okay. Learning outcomes. This is a very, very important term. It is essential when we are trying to determine whether our lessons have been successful or not. Learning outcomes provide the evidence of student learning, and they provide the evidence that our teaching has been successful. Okay, so we have learning objectives, which is what we plan to teach, but learning outcomes provide the evidence. This comes from students, and this is what we can see from our students, as we will see in a few minutes later on, whether or not our students have learned, whether or not what we planned to happen in terms of learning actually did happen. So this is the ultimate criterion for success when you're dealing with international accreditation agencies, for example. So when they send their teams from Europe or from the United States, they usually, the first thing they look at is the learning outcomes when they go to observe classes. Okay, and again, you'll see the POC there and the exam, the word exam and the word or the acronym POC, because we must be able to refer to learning outcomes when we meet with our coordinators and our supervisors. And learning outcomes are also a topic that appear on the international exams and also on the ministry exams. We have to be able to determine whether our classes were successful or not, and the learning outcomes will provide us with that evidence. Engagement. Of course, engagement is the third element. We must engage our students. Students who are not engaged do not learn. It's that simple, okay? And so we want to ensure a high degree of participation from all of our students. We want everybody to participate. If everybody is engaged, everybody has a better chance of learning. If the input is relevant and meaningful, that is a word I use all the time because it is a very important word that appears everywhere. Hello, Giovanna. Hello, Esperanza. Okay, welcome, Karencita. All right, so that is very important. The input has to be motivating. The teaching style has an impact on engagement. If we're monotonous and we like lectures, giving lectures all the time, it's very likely that we will not have our students as engaged as they should be. However, if we're very dynamic, interactive, and we focus on making our classes student-centered, then the students will be more engaged. If we go through the trouble of doing our research in finding out the kind of music that our students like and enjoy and the activities that they like, then obviously it will be much more likely that they will be engaged because our lessons will reflect that. And of course, we want to make sure our instructions are very clear. If our instructions are not clear, or if our instructions are primarily verbal in nature or auditory, in nature, and do not have visual support, then the instructions will be more difficult to understand. And if they are more difficult to understand, it's harder to engage the students. And of course, we want everybody to participate. It is a natural tendency sometimes to forget one or more students in our class. I've seen it. I've observed classes where inadvertently the teacher forgot the students on the corners or on the extremes of the U, or perhaps focused more on the younger students if it was a mixed class and the older students were not encouraged to participate as much. And again, you see the POC there, because engagement is another issue that appears or that is addressed during the feedback session with the coordinator. And it is also addressed on the variety of different exams that deal with teaching. Okay. Aim or purpose, this is so important. I mean, all of these elements are important. They all have an impact on success, but we have to know what the aim is for our decisions and our actions, why we're doing this, what is the purpose of that. And this applies to the whole course, but it also applies to actual lessons, activities, and even the teaching steps in a procedure. Everything must have an aim, a clearly defined aim or a purpose. There has to be a reason, so that if somebody asks you, why did you do this? Then you'll be able to give an answer. So that is relevant. Again, it is relevant for the post-observation conference or the feedback session. And it's also very important for the exams. Exams deal with aims all the time. We're going to see some examples today. I got disconnected here. Hold on a second. Let me go to English teachers in Peru. Let me just double check. I want to be able to see everybody. There we go. We're back in business. Okay. Number 5, support. We need support from the technology. We need the right tools. We need images. We need videos, audios, the LMS systems, right? The learning management systems. All of those elements must come together to help us get closer and closer to success each and every time we get together with our students. So these tools and resources, they also are dealt with in our feedback session. They'll ask us why we use this or why we use that. We have to know why. There has to be a reason for that as well. The same occurs with exams. We have to know why we use these elements to help our classes and our students succeed. So we're going to see questions on ministry exams. We're going to see questions on international exams related to teaching that have to deal with the variety of resources and tools that we can use to help our students succeed and to help our classes be more effective. And the last element is, of course, evaluation. Evaluation, we must always evaluate the results of our work. So at the end of every lesson, we need to reflect on what we did. We need to reflect on what our students did and how they responded, more importantly, how much learning took place, and how do we know for sure if the class really met all of the goals, objectives, and outcomes that we had envisioned. We want to look at our teaching. What did we do right? And what did we do that could have been done perhaps a little more effectively? We want to look at affect. Affect is how good people feel. How good did our students feel from beginning to end? And how good did we feel? Because we have to also be very happy and positive when we work with our students if the class is to succeed. And finally, all of this information can help us arrive at conclusions as to what we can continue cultivating as our strengths and what we can identify as opportunities for improvement. So these are the 6 elements. Please is the framework, right? And I just went through each one of the elements, and they all have an impact on the success of our lessons. Now let's look at some practical examples, the do's and the don'ts, okay, of what we should do in class, whether it be virtual or face-to-face. And hopefully within a few months or half a year, we'll be back in our face-to-face classes in Peru. That would be in March. So let's deal with one particular area, error correction. How many of you think error correction, or what we now call corrective feedback? I put error correction because it's shorter and it fit in the picture a little better. But how many of you think corrective feedback or error correction is important when we teach? Let me take a look at the responses here. And there's a 20-second delay. So let's take a look. Okay. All right. Okay, so we're waiting for the response. And Sari Rocio Ospina is here. Look at that. Now she knows what that picture means. She's talking about fear. Now she mentioned fear because, oh, Charles has a different perspective. They're both very good and very valuable. Charles says it's a great opportunity to learn two things here. Fear is true. It's a factor because students are insecurity. She's also mentioning insecurity because students are afraid of making mistakes. It's probably the biggest reason why they don't like to speak in class. But we have to teach them, as Charles points out, that it is an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to grow in your mastery of the English language. And so it is very important, okay? Both are necessary, okay? Very good. Okay, good comments. Let me see another one. Very important. Viviana says very important. Roxana Chavez says, of course, we need corrective feedback in class. Carmen says we have to do it at the right time. I couldn't agree with you more. But everybody agrees it has to be done. And the research shows that in order for the second language acquisition process to be effective, to be successful, we must apply corrective feedback systematically from the very beginning, from when students begin at a very early level, and that is usually pre-A1, elementary, real beginners, or if most of our learners are false beginners, they're going to begin at the A1 level. Yeah, but from the very beginning of the learning process, we have to apply corrective feedback systematically. However, as Carmen pointed out before, there are a couple of important questions we have to ask. When should we correct? Should we correct all the time? So that's something that we have to have clearly worked out in our minds so that we don't make any substantial mistakes. Number two, if we are to correct, what should we correct? And number three, who should do the correcting? So hopefully by the time I finish this segment, we're going to know the answers to all three questions, okay? It's actually pretty easy. It's pretty easy. It's a pretty easy framework when you work it out, right? When you have it, when we discuss it and you have a clearly defined framework, corrective feedback becomes a relatively easy practice. But it has to be done with a high degree of discipline, because again, it must be systematic if we're going to help our students. The research shows us time and time again. Studies by Dr. Larry Selenker, Dr. Rod Ellis have shown that if we apply different treatments for errors, specific types of errors, under certain circumstances over a period of time, those errors disappear. And they can disappear for as long as a year, even when there is no more treatment. Okay, so it's very important that we do this. And as Dr. Diane Larson Freeman also has stated, it is the responsibility, it is our utmost responsibility to make sure that we apply corrective feedback systematically throughout the entire learning process. Otherwise, fossilization will settle in, okay, or set in. All right, let's take a look at this, a little exercise before we begin. On the left, the instructions, read each situation to the right and decide if corrective feedback is generally appropriate, so you're going to put a Y, or inappropriate or not appropriate, you're going to put an N. So in each situation to the right, we're going to assume that the students have made a certain type of mistake, perhaps with a specific grammatical structure, or multiple types of mistakes, maybe grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation mistakes have been made. So take a look, and then if you can, type the letter and a Y or an N, okay? So A, do you think, for example, when a student is reporting on the work the group has done, that if the student is making mistakes, we should correct that student there at that particular point in time? Yes or no? Do you think it's appropriate? If you think it's appropriate, then put a yes, put a Y. If you think it's not appropriate, then put an N. And do the same for B, C, D, E, F, and G. And then we'll check in about 2 minutes. Let me get my other phone. Where's my other phone? Okay, that's okay. I'll use my time here. So I will give you about 2 minutes. See how many of these you can get. Again, put the letter and then put a Y or an N. If you think corrective feedback should be applied, put a Y. If you think corrective feedback should not be applied, put an N. Okay? 2 minutes. Let's see. All right, Viviana jumped right in. Viviana Manzanero. For A, she says no. Who's going to follow Viviana? Well, maybe somebody has a different answer. Viviana jumped right in. I see Lady has joined us. Very good. Juana also agrees with Viviana that A should be N. Let's see if we can move on to B. And while we're seeing the answers from everybody, I'm reading some very good comments. So Eli says, or Ellie says, that corrective feedback will depend on the case. So everybody seems to agree that A is no. I'm seeing no for everybody. And for B, what about B, guys? Let's see. Viviana has given an answer. She says B is no as well. Okay. All right. So, all right. So we're getting different answers. All right. Diana is also answering right now. And Roger is answering right now as well. Okay. All right. And we'll give it another minute. All right. C, so I'm getting some no's for C. And for E, a no. Oh, it's interesting. Good, because it's gonna, because otherwise I'd have to end the presentation because that wouldn't be necessary at all. But I'm seeing some very good answers, very interesting perspectives. Okay, well, let's take a look. Okay, and Sadi has gone, she's flown right through all of them right there. She's gotten up to G. Very good. Okay, and Karen as well. Okay, so Karen's saying B and C is yes. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's take a look at the answers, guys. The ones in yellow are the ones that require corrective feedback. So for example, in A, the student is reporting on the work the group has done. We do not want to apply corrective feedback there. The purpose is not accuracy. We do not want the student, we're not asking the student to use a particular grammatical structure or vocabulary word family correctly. The student is just simply reporting on what's been done. The student is using his speaking skill or her speaking skill to describe what the group has done during the activity. In B, this is a pre-reading discussion. Pre-reading discussion is never focused on accuracy. A pre-reading discussion, as we will see later, always has the purpose of engaging the students with the topic of the reading, nothing more, okay? C, the students are practicing voiced and unvoiced S sound in pairs. Yeah, we have to make sure the students are getting the sounds right because there is a distinction between the voiced S and the unvoiced S, right? The vibration, right? Zzz and the S, right? So we want to make sure, otherwise, you know, it's a mistake and we're focusing on pronunciation. They have to get it right. D, students are talking about their relatives on the family. So the students are making mistakes. So for example, if they say aunt, which is a correct pronunciation in American English, or aunt, which is British English, but if I say aunt, then there has to be clarification. Otherwise, it has an impact on comprehensibility. If I say uncle instead of uncle, then again, that must be corrected because we are learning, you know, the words related to family. So we're trying to identify and use the words associated with our relatives, a father, mother, niece, a nephew, son, daughter, grandfather, grandmother. We have to pronounce those words correctly because that's the focus of the lesson. And so if the students are making mistakes, we must correct them, okay? E, the students are comparing pictures A and B after listening, using the present continuous. So the activity requires them to use the present continuous. They have to do it correctly. And the purpose of the activity is to get them to use the present continuous. So we want them to get it right? So this is a form of getting them to practice the present continuous. Perhaps the activity came after a grammar presentation. Maybe the grammar presentation was the day before. F, students are doing a writing activity after a listening. So this is after a listening, not after a grammar. So the writing activity is probably just free practice, okay, on the topic of the listening. And finally, G, students are doing a role play with the fortune teller making predictions with Will. A prediction is not complete if you don't use the right grammar, right? So we want to make sure they use the right grammar because otherwise their ability to communicate a prediction is affected. People might misunderstand in the real world what they're trying to say. So we want to make sure that they get that right, okay? All right, good. So a little warm up there. Now, how do we know? So remember the question, when do we correct errors? It's very easy. We correct errors when we're focusing on form, when the activity, the task, or the part of the lesson is form focused rather than meaning focused, okay? When it's meaning focused, when we want the student to focus on meaning, and the intention of the teacher is that the students only focus on meaning with no particular need for accuracy, then it's meaning focused. And we do not correct. I repeat, we do not correct our students when the activity is meaning focused. The MFI stands for meaning focused instruction. The FFI stands for form focused instruction. So again, we want to make sure that we only correct our students when the activity or the task or the segment of the lesson is form focused. We do not want to do that when the student is focused on meaning, and the teacher only wants them to focus on meaning and fluency. So that is the difference. The question is, okay, when do we do that? That's the when, okay? How do we describe the difference? So I'm going to read a list of activities to you, and I'd like you to put them under the correct list, okay? So some of them might be form focused, some of them are meaning focused, and one or two might be both. So I'm going to read the activities to you, and I'd like you to tell me which one do you think it falls under, okay? So let us take a look, and I'm going to read this to you. Here comes the first word. The first word is accuracy. Does accuracy fall under form focused instruction or meaning focused instruction? Put it under the list on your piece of paper if you have one at home. And you can type it in the chat box with the Facebook Live streaming. Next word, fluency. FFI or MFI. Remember, FFI is form focused, and MFI is meaning focused. So fluency, does it go on the left or on the right? Reproduction. Reproduction. Is that on the left or on the right? Next word. Production or production. I'm doing production to contrast with the previous word, reproduction. So production, is that meaning focused or form focused? Grammar. Form focused or meaning focused? Listening. Meaning focused or form focused? Vocabulary. Left or right? Reading. Left or right? 2 more. Choral repetition. Choral repetition, left or right. And finally, summarizing. Summarizing, left or right. Let's see what people are putting here. Okay. Roger, Marilee, okay. Lita, very good. Carmen and Roger. Okay, excellent. Let's take a look at the answers. Bingo. I did not mention writing or speaking because they fall under both. It depends on how you structure the task or the activity and what you ask your students to do. But in general, form-focused instruction focuses on accuracy and meaning-focused instruction focuses on fluency. Reproduction is when we have our students speak or write in a very similar fashion to a model or a script or some text that they've been given, whereas production is uniquely spontaneous. The student speaks or writes from here, not from a model, not from a piece of paper, not from a textbook. Grammar, when you're teaching grammar, you are always going to apply corrective feedback when mistakes are made. When you're teaching listening, you are not going to apply corrective feedback. Okay, you're not going to apply corrective feedback. Vocabulary or lexis is considered a form along with grammar and pronunciation. So you are going to correct mistakes when you are teaching grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation. With reading, you're not going to do that. Okay, reading is not subject to corrective feedback. And as I said before, writing and speaking fall under both categories. It depends very much on what your focus is and how your writing or speaking task is designed, and ultimately what you ask your students to do. Finally, choral repetition is always associated with accuracy. So that falls under form-focused instruction. And of course, if anybody makes a mistake, you're going to correct them. If the whole class is making a mistake, you're going to correct them again. Summarizing is a uniquely fluency-focused activity, so summarizing is not subject to corrective feedback. Okay? Okay. All right, we're going to skip this for a second because I'll send that to people later. This activity here, and I've shown this before on other occasions. Let's take a look here. Let's take a look here. When we're looking at form-focused instruction, there are 3 types. And this is according to Dr. Rod Ellis. He has a taxonomy for form-focused instruction. The first type, or type 1, is when we are specifically teaching grammar, vocabulary, or pronunciation. Okay, so today, for example, hello everybody. Today we're going to learn how to use the present perfect. Today we're going to learn how to link sounds. Today we're going to learn how to talk about the family. So this is when you are explicitly teaching grammar, vocabulary, or pronunciation, and everybody knows it. So that's type 1. Type 2 is when the students are focused on meaning, but the activity requires the students to use a specific grammatical structure or family of words. If they don't use a grammatical structure or family of words, then they're not really going to be able to do the activity or task successfully. Okay? That's number 2. And number 3 is when the students are just completely focused on meaning. The teacher is also completely focused on meaning, but as the teacher is walking around, she or he notices that the students are making mistakes and takes notes and lets the activity finish. And after the activity is finished, then she or he reviews the mistakes with grammar and pronunciation or vocabulary, or maybe all 3, yeah? Because these are different types of mistakes. So here, this is focus on forms. This is intentional. This is when we teach explicitly grammar, pronunciation, or vocabulary. Here, we're focused on meaning, but the students need a specific grammatical structure or vocabulary to be able to do the activity successfully. And the third one is incidental, because we decide to take notes and then we decide to review the mistakes after the communicative activity is over. We never do it during the activity. So let's take a look. This activity here is a typical activity. So we are comparing these two pictures. We're trying to find the differences. Student A has picture A, student B has picture B, and they are trying to do, and Roger says he usually does plan, focus on form tasks. That's very good for you, Roger, because Dr. Rod Ellis, who is English, but who's been living in New Zealand for a very long time, almost 40 years, he would agree with you that you're doing the right thing, because that is the type of activity that most promotes second language acquisition, according to the research. So anyway, going back to this, we're comparing picture A and picture B, okay? So the teacher might say something like, okay, guys, I want you to work together. Student A will have picture A, student B will have picture B. Find the differences. How many differences can you find between the pictures, okay? So that's what you ask your students to do. Then your students work together and, oops, sorry, let me go back. Okay. So which type of activity is this? Is this a type 1, a type 2, or a type 3? So remember, type 1 is explicit. Type 2 is planned, focused on meaning, but students need to use a specific grammatical structure or a vocabulary word family to be able to do the activity correctly. And 3 is entirely focused on meaning, and the teacher only corrects at the end of the activity after everybody is finished. So which one is this? Is this a type 1, type 2, or type 3? Let me see. Remember, well, let me make it easier for you. It's not a type 1, because in type 1, it would be a grammar presentation or a vocabulary presentation or a pronunciation feature presentation. This is not a type 1. It's only a type 2 or a type 3. I'm getting a lot of answers. A lot of people seem to think it's a type 3. Some of you think it's a type 2. The correct answer is it is a type 2, because the students are focused on meaning. Remember, I never said to use a specific grammatical structure. My instructions were, I want you to work together and find the differences between the two pictures. However, to find the differences, what grammatical structure do they need? What is the grammatical structure they need to use? Now everybody's switching to type 2. All right. So the grammatical structure is, can somebody give it to me? What is the grammatical structure we use here? Okay, Roger is telling us we must use the present continuous. That is correct. However, I never said use the present continuous. Carmen agrees. Rocio agrees. I never said, students, I want you to work together and practice the present continuous. So I want you to find the differences. I never said that. I just said, I want you to work together. Good, Miriam. Good, Catherine. Good. Good, Maria. Good, Elizabeth. The only thing I said was, I want you to find the differences. So my instructions focused on meaning, but the students unconsciously had to use present continuous to do the activity correctly. Okay? All right, very good. So this is very typical. And by the way, you will see this on methodology exams. You will probably see that, you could see this on the ministry exam, and you might also see this on the TKT. So beware. Okay. Look at this activity. This is called Think, Pair, Share. It's a CLT. It's a cooperative learning technique. It's cooperative because it requires people to work together, cooperate. Okay, so it's called Let's Talk About Vacations. And here the students work together. Each student will talk about her or his vacation. They talk for 60 seconds. One student is A and one student is B. And they talk for 60 seconds. Student A goes first. Then the teacher says stop, and then student B goes and talks for 60 seconds. They must talk and talk without stopping. They have to talk about their vacations. Now, you can put these guiding questions on the board. Where did you go? When did you go? Who did you go with? What did you do? Etc. You can put some guiding questions on the board to help your students produce the language. When they stop, they can switch partners. They can have another partner, a new partner. You can have them circulate, move around the classroom, meet different people. And then at the very end, they have to report on one or more of their partners, tell us about the vacations they learned about. So this is a cooperative learning technique. Now, if we look at the types of activities, is this a type 1, a type 2, or a type 3? Look at the instructions. Well, forget about type 1. I'm not dealing with type 1 today. So this is not a type 1. It is either type 2 or type 3. So which one do you think it is? Type 2 or type 3? Remember, this is not a type 1. I'm not dealing with type 1 tonight. So it's only type 2 or type 3. Now look at the instructions and think about the language you need for this. Is it completely open, or do you have to use a specific grammatical structure to do this? Okay, I'm getting mixed answers. The correct answer is, Carol says 2, Vanya says 2, Jesse says 3, Sarai says 3, Gloria says 3. A lot of 3s. And then, yeah, a lot of 3s. The correct answer is 2 again. Why? Now, again, this is a meaning focused activity on the surface. But what grammatical structure do you need to do this activity correctly? And you're probably going to use this right after a presentation. Very good, Karina. Karina Torres. Very good, Carmen Pinedo. Very good, Marlene. Very good. Very good. Okay, so we need to use the simple past. So the simple past is what we have to do. So this is a way to practice the simple past. Now remember, I never said I want you to practice the simple past. I gave you general instructions that were focused on meaning. However, to do this correctly, you must use the simple past. So it is a type 2. Okay, does everybody see that? Last example here before we move on to the next topic. Pre-reading discussion. Let's talk about UFOs. I will draw a circle on the board with the word UFO in the middle. Give me as many ideas as you can about the word. You will get into groups and talk about UFOs. You will tell your partners whether you believe in them or not and why. I will circulate and take notes. We will then discuss your ideas as a class. Okay, again, this is not a type 1. This is only a type 2 or a type 3. So which one is this? Now the clue, you have to ask yourself if you need any specific vocabulary or any specific grammar to do this activity. If the answer is yes, it might be a type 2. If the answer is no, it's probably a type 3. Judith says, definitely a type 3. Rocio, type 3. Consuelo, type 3. Carmen, type 3. Ellie, oh, I think everybody's unanimous here. The answer is type 3. It is a type 3 because it's completely open. It's a pre-reading discussion. So we don't require the students to use any specific vocabulary or any specific grammar. It is a type 3 a classic example of type 3. So this is very, very good. And again, these are things that we need to know so that we can put together some very effective activities. So when it's virtual, when we're working with the scenario virtually, again, it's necessary that we do this, that we do these types of activities. It's a little easier to do corrective feedback actually when we work in a virtual environment, because we can go from breakout room to breakout room, and we can hear the errors and focus on those errors. In a physical classroom, we hear a lot of noise from everywhere. So sometimes we can get some distractions, but in a virtual classroom, we can go from one breakout room to another, and we can focus on the students and listen to what they're saying, and we can record what they're saying. And so by recording it, we can give them more focused feedback, right? And so it will get easier for us as we practice this more and more, but actually giving corrective feedback in a virtual environment is easier, or can be easier if we try, than it is in a physical classroom. Okay, next topic, grammar. Grammar teaching. I could not give a presentation without referring to grammar. So, do you agree with this? If grammar cannot be used for communication, it is useless. Do you agree with that? You don't have to agree, by the way. You don't have to be extra nice and agree with me. It's actually, I should turn on the air conditioning. I got the fan on in here, but the air conditioning, I have to turn on the air conditioning. I forgot. It's summertime here, so it's 90 degrees outside. So it's like 30 something, I guess, in centigrade. And I forgot to turn on the air conditioning. Sorry about that. So, okay, so do you agree with this? If grammar cannot be used for communication, it is useless. Do you agree? Carmen, yes. Roger, yes. Let's get 2 more answers. Everybody else is thinking about it. Totally agree. All right, Charles, Roxana, Indira. Yeah, listen, I mean, grammar can have other purposes, but the main reason somebody is studying a second language is to be able to communicate in the real world. So grammar must be able to contribute to that goal. Otherwise, its utility is minimal, if not. Well, you can always use grammar for other things, but people learn, again, the main goal of learning a second language is to communicate in the real world with other people, and grammar must be able to contribute to that. Otherwise, it's practically useless from that perspective. Let's take a look here, trivia, very quickly. I'll give you a minute because I want to move to the videos. So trivia, do you agree or disagree here? Okay, since we're talking about grammar. Okay, we're talking about grammar. The 3P method is still sufficient for teaching grammar nowadays. That's number 1. Do you agree or disagree? 2, examples from a textbook can be sufficient to establish context for the grammar. Yeah. 3, textbook exercises can provide us with evidence that students can use the grammar. So remember that, when we do in the textbook, we do, the students do the exercises, multiple choice, sometimes they're transformation drills. Is that enough to give us evidence that the students can use the grammar? So please put number 1, yes or no. Number 2, number 1, A or D. Number 2, A or D. Number 3, A or D. Number 4, schema theory has a direct bearing on the success of a grammar lesson, yes or no? Now remember, schema theory comes from Piaget, mainly. He's the one who's always been given credit for it. So schema theory says that it is best to learn something new if it connects to something that we have already experienced in our lives, or something that is very important to us, our background knowledge. Yeah. So schema theory, does that apply when we're teaching grammar? Yes or no? Number 5, grammar should be learned because it appears on all kinds of tests for English language learners and teachers. And number 6, grammar should still be taught live by way of our video conferencing sessions. Marco Antonio Girón, there's my guy. Look at that. Okay, thank you, Marco. It's good to see you in the audience, my friend. Okay. Fantastic. Now I'm more motivated. See, I'm motivated with all these wonderful people who are here. But now my friend, a friend from a long time ago, I see him in the presentation here. So it's great, more motivated. So what do you guys think? I'm getting some answers here. 1 and 2 is D, and 3 is A, and 4, again, 1, we're getting all kinds of answers. We'll give 1 more minute, and then we'll go over the answers together. I want to get to those videos. I see Nancy Alvarez is there too. Okay, I've seen that name many times. Great to see you here, Nancy. Okay, everybody seems to be getting the, oh, right, good. I think we're all on the same page. We're all on the same page. Charles says number 6 is D. Now, Charles is the only one who's given me an answer for number 6. Can anybody else give me an answer for number 6? Number 6. Blanca, thank you so much, Blanca. Thank you. Motivating. Number 6. Who else? Charles gave me an answer for number 6. Who else could give me an answer for number 6? Okay. All right. Thank you, Karina. And okay. Oh, okay. We got quite a. I think Charles is kind of on his own with number 6. Oh no, wait, Charles, you got a friend here, Julia. Julia agrees with you. Okay. All right. Let's take a look. Let's see. Listen, there's no absolute truth in life. Okay. These are referential answers. The 3P method is always effective. It will always work. It's a masterpiece. But nowadays, it's kind of incomplete unless you go inductive. You need to go inductive first. All right. So you have to go with the whole noticing arrangement, provide the students with the input, and then let the students analyze it and try to get them to notice the language, the target language in the input, before we go to clarification and the rest of the 3P procedure. So 3P, yes, technically you can still teach 3P on its own, but it's kind of not sufficient anymore in a lot of cases. What we recommend and what the research suggests is that we try to go inductive first. And this is why in the new textbooks, you see an inductive component. So the inductive stage and then a deductive stage. So we go from inductive input with the target language, whether it be vocabulary or grammar, and then we see the analysis and the noticing, and then we see the clarification, which is the substitute for presentation, and then we go with the exercises, the practice, and the production. Okay, so that's what we see today. We should try to go inductive because inductive pushes our students to try to really get a better grasp of the new language. Number 2, examples from the textbook are never sufficient. They never were, and they're not now either. We have to come up with examples because remember, textbooks are made for a world market. So textbooks might be made for Latin America, but what might be very relevant in Mexico or Guatemala may not be so relevant in Peru and Chile, and vice versa. And so we want to make sure that we personalize or we contextualize locally the examples to help our students understand better. So that would probably be false. 3, textbook exercises. Well, look at this. And this is what I want everybody to practice. We have to focus on key words. Textbook exercises can provide us with evidence that the students can use, not can understand, but rather can use the grammar. And we use the grammar when we speak or when we write. Okay? So, exercises can be indicative of comprehension, but not necessarily of communicative ability. In fact, it's incomplete. If we just focus on that, it's incomplete. So that would be false. Schema theory, it does have a direct bearing because grammar, when we're teaching grammar, it's easier to understand, as we're going to see in a few minutes, if we relate it to something from the student's own culture or own reality. 4, 5, grammar should be learned, yes, because it does appear on a whole bunch of exams for all of the proficiency examinations. They don't call it grammar anymore, they call it language use. But all of the examinations, whether it's TOEFL, Cambridge, Michigan, they all use GEP College Board, all of them have grammar. They just call it something else. Okay, and most of them call it language use, but grammar is still in there. So yes, we do need it. And then, but that would be a secondary purpose, not a primary purpose. The primary purpose is to use grammar for communication. Number 6, grammar should be still taught live by what? No, it should not. And I'm going to explain why not. So Charles, I agree with you. Not that doesn't mean everybody else is wrong. I mean, if you have all the time in the world, you have a lot of hours per week. If you have what, 10 to 15 hours a week, and you can spare some time to teach grammar, go ahead. But most of us don't have extra time with our students each week. And so we have to really make sure that we use that time, that valuable time, as efficiently as possible. And teaching grammar in a traditional manner by way of a video conference is not efficient. And you're going to see why. Yeah. So we know this. I'm going to skip this. I don't want to go in this. So again, we talked about the stages of the grammar, right? So stage 1 and stage 2, I talked about this. If this is the 3P method here, 3, 4, and 5, presentation, practice, and production, what is stage 1 and 2? Okay, so steps 1 and 2, I'm going backwards. I'm going like a crab. I'm going backwards. Steps 1 and 2 would be the inductive stage of the grammar lesson. And 3, 4, and 5 would be the deductive, or the more explicit grammar instruction stage. So this is when we're working on clarification and when we're doing the exercises for restrictive practice. And we have the free practice over here, or the production. Yeah. So this is inductive, deductive, or explicit. So that's why we need to try to do this. Now, with the research shows that with very complex or abstract grammatical structures, it is better that we use an explicit traditional 3P approach or method. Yeah. So if the grammatical structure, especially at the intermediate or high intermediate level, is abstract and complex, we should probably just stick to 3P. In all of the other cases, we should try to use inductive, deductive approach to grammar. Okay? That's what the research says. Now, virtual. The great thing about virtual is that a lot of the work we had to do can be assumed by technology. So we can have the learning management system, if it is robust enough, if it is strong enough, if it is well designed enough, and if it has enough content, it can provide the grammatical teaching and learning for the most part. Now, obviously, we want to apply the grammar in communicative practice. That we will do in our video conferences. But the teaching of the grammar itself and the practicing in a more restricted way can be assumed by the platform or the learning management system. So the students can practice in advance, okay? They can watch a video with a presentation. They don't have to listen to us live. Clarification can be done when they meet with us, so we can clarify any doubts or questions that the students might still have. But we will focus primarily on practice, not on explanations, not on lectures. Again, that's why we have technology. Technology is supposed to make our work easier, okay? And it's supposed to make our ability to use time more efficient, okay? So this is why we should take advantage of that. That's why the answer to number 6 was D, because we really shouldn't be teaching grammar online unless you have all the time in the world, okay? But that is something that can be better done by technology. We can clarify the grammar. We can have the students practice the grammar with communicative activities. but we shouldn't be lecturing or teaching grammar traditionally. So we can use a video like this one from our courses online from ABA. And so this is the system can handle most of the explanations, and they can give strategies and tips on how to work with the grammar. Okay, examples. And then what you can do, so I'm going to stop it right here. Okay, we're going to stop it. So again, as you can see, the grammar presentation stage that we used to do in a physical class by the board, interacting and working collaboratively with our students, can be assumed by technology to a large extent. Okay, that saves us time. Okay, makes our work easier, and we can focus on getting our students to really use and understand the language. Okay. Okay, she's still talking. Let me put her. Okay, thank you for your grammar lesson, but we're going to move to the next video. Here in the video, we can see input. There we go. You see? Let me make sure that share sound. Yes.
Don't get schooled.
Everybody can share the sound. There we go. So you can see here input,
small, easy to manage steps, like the way you learn new things at
the way of the
work.
platform, and
Start by
what
preparing
think about this is that
meals as possible and follow a schedule. Cut down on
that they
unhealthy
want.
foods and replace
So this is
them
input.
with
They're exposed to
nutritious ones.
input.
Substituting vegetable fats, for example, switching
To
butter
the
for
input,
olive oil
they
for animal fats,
can practice the
beneficial
grammar,
to your health.
as you can see here. Okay. Where's the grammar? There we go. There we go. Okay. Please cooperate. Okay. So as you can see here, we're practicing modals, but this is based on the listening comprehension. Okay, so they can get all the grammar practice they can by way of the computer. We don't have to teach this. We don't have to do the traditional teaching during our video conferences. However, I have seen some classes from some well-known, I won't say where, which country or countries, but they're still teaching the old-fashioned way, but by way of video conferencing. That is a very inefficient way to use your time, especially when you don't have enough of it. So ideally, you want a careful balance between the platform, what the platform can do, if it's strong enough, if it's good enough, so that you can focus on getting your students to practice their communication skills. Okay. And of course, you can clarify some points if you need to, but the main focus is on communicative practice. Here you see the picture of an activity with some prompts. Superlatives, if we want to practice superlatives, we remind our students that superlatives, if they have two or more syllables, they can very well go with most plus the adjective. So most beautiful, most sophisticated, most difficult, or it's just EST or IST, right? So lovely, loveliest, right? Pretty, prettiest, smart, smartest, etc. So here, for example, if this is Iquitos, and we want to use the adjective hot, what would be a sentence with Iquitos and hot using the superlative? Can somebody give me a sentence? Iquitos and hot, but the superlative. Okay, Ellie is telling us that it's the best region. I would have to agree that it is a very popular region, a beautiful place. I've been there many, many times. And if it wasn't so hot, I'd love to live there. But Iquitos is the hottest place in Peru. Very good, Maria Pilar. It is the hottest region in Peru. Okay, so we got hottest, yeah? How about Puno? Puno and cold. Puno is on the left. So puno. How about somebody give me a sentence with good. Hottest city in Peru. Iquitos is the hottest city in Peru. Socorro. Okay. Betty, the same. Very good. How about Puno? Puno and cold. Puno and cold. Good. Annelique, Puno is the coldest. Charles, very good. Coldest. Puno is the coldest city in Peru. How about, excellent, Jesse. Puno is the coldest city in Peru. Okay. Piura is the hottest. Okay. Piura, I've been there many times, my friend. Marco Antonio Giron. Piura is a beautiful city and fantastic food as well. Okay. Excellent food in Piura. Okay. What about Gaston Acurio? If we use famous, Gaston Acurio, famous. Now, what is Gaston Acurio? What is his occupation? Puno is the coldest region. All right, so we have a slight delay, but I'm sure I'm going to get something with Gaston. Yurimaguas is hotter. Now, that's a comparative, Joel, but that's a very good sentence. Sarai, of course, Iquitos is the most, well, I don't know about the most beautiful. I'm sure all the regions are beautiful. I know Iquitos is a very beautiful region. Gaston Acurio is the most famous chef in the world, Miriam. She's a proud fan of Gaston Acurio. Judith, Gaston Acurio is the most famous chef in Peru. Okay, so if we work with content that is Peruvian, it's easier to understand, To close on grammar, remember, we have a limited amount of time. We don't have all the time in the world. We need to focus on getting students to practice speaking. We have the technology as a backup. We must be efficient. How can we get the most learning and practice out of the time we have with our students? And we have to let go of some of these preconceptions from before the pandemic. We have to start doing things in a new and different way. We can't be teaching the way we used to, because it doesn't work as well. I've seen it. I've seen some classes. They're on YouTube, and you would expect a little more. It's not the teacher's fault, but somebody should be telling the teachers and training the teachers at these institutions that we shouldn't be teaching the way we used to teach before the pandemic. It's just not as effective. And then finally, you want to free yourself. You want to focus on things you want to do and things that you can help your students the most with, and let the computer take care of the rest as much as possible. Okay? Okay, very good. Very good. Now, this is very important, guys. I want you to listen very quickly. We're going to watch this video very quickly. Tell me if the students can talk about favorite hobbies using gerunds. They can talk about favorite hobbies using gerunds. Now, remember what gerunds are: verb ing, swimming and reading and playing soccer and watching TV and working out, that kind of stuff. So listen to these students and tell me if you think they can talk about favorite hobbies using gerunds. We're going to listen to them for about a minute. Just tell me if you think they can or can't. You must listen to the instructions from the examiner. And again, I got this from the internet, so there's no copyright infringement or anything. This is freely available on the internet. Okay, here we go.
I like watch TV and
talk together.
Okay, hold on. Let me find the instructions.
All right.
Okay.
Say why or why not. These different hobbies.
Hold on, guys. Bear with me. Okay, here we go.
Say that again. Do you like these different hobbies? Say why or why not. All right. Now, talk together.
I like watch TV and read the books. And you like read books?
No, I prefer watch TV. And you, do you like play football?
No, because I don't like play with balls. and do you like sing or play instruments?
No, it's difficult for me. I prefer play football.
And watch TV?
Yes, I very like it because there are a lot of interesting documentary.
Okay, so the question here is, did both students meet the task? Did they comply with the task? They can talk about favorite hobbies using gerunds. The point here is the boy kind of did, but the girl was unable to really explain beyond one of the questions why she did or did not like the activity, right? So when she was asked about football, she said she didn't like playing with balls. The boy made an attempt to give more complete answers, but at this particular level, they should be able to produce more language. So perhaps we can say that the boy, all right, we'll be a little generous and we'll say that he kind of met the objective, but the girl did not. So it's very important that when we're teaching grammar, that the end result be that the student be able to use the grammar for conversation or for these types of situations. Otherwise, if they can't use the grammar to communicate, the grammar really doesn't help them at all. It's not really helpful. Okay, I just wanted to make that point. Okay, reading and listening, point number 3, and then we're going to go to the feedback and then finally the questions for the test. So very quickly, reading and listening. What is the main purpose of a reading and listening? A, use the input to practice speaking and or writing. B, use the input to introduce the new grammar or vocabulary. Or C, use the input to develop comprehension skills. Of the 3, which do you think is the main purpose of a reading or listening activity? Remember, they're both receptive skills, so they're very similar in terms of the purpose in the classroom. Carmen says C. Charles says C. Roger says C. Okay, good. So the correct answer is C. We also use it for A and B, but the main purpose is for C. We need to remember that, okay? So when we are teaching it, we can teach it to introduce new grammar and vocabulary. This is usually done with an inductive lesson. At the inductive stage, remember we saw the input. We can use it as a way to stimulate speaking and writing practice, but open speaking and writing practice without any particular grammatical structure in mind. Or then again, we might want to focus on the use of a specific grammar or vocabulary. But the main reason is that we want our students to develop their comprehension skills. And the best way to determine if students have understood is through speaking, okay? Now, input. Before we even get students to develop their comprehension skills, we must make sure the input is appropriate. So we're going to listen to Dr. Stephen Krashen talk about optimal input, okay, for a few minutes. I want you to pay attention to the 4 main components of or characteristics of optimal input. See if you can take notes and identify the 4 main characteristics. I see Washington and Juana and Kayan and Lulu and Elva, everybody got the right answer. Very good. To the previous question, let's listen to Stephen Krashen.
Studies over the years have shown that methods of language teaching that are consistent with what we call optimal input result in more input hypothesis says. We acquire language from input, from understanding what we hear and what we read, not from speaking and writing. Our ability to speak and write fluently and accurately is the result of acquiring language from input. The evidence for this, briefly, studies showing the universality of a silent period, especially in informal language acquisition. Output, we make students write more and speak more. Also, the observation that language acquisition can occur without any output at all, and increasing input increases the quality of output. Finally, forcing output in language classes, making students talk before they're ready, is a cause of considerable anxiety. I first discussed optimal input years ago, and the concept has been deepened and improved by Benico Mason. We've concluded that optimal input has these 4 characteristics. Number 1, of course, it's comprehensible. This doesn't mean every detail is comprehensible. Input can be comprehensible, even if there's a little noise in the input, some incomprehensible pieces. This includes unknown vocabulary and grammar, rules that have not yet been acquired, but are not important for comprehension. In other words, language acquisition does not require that you understand every word and every part of every word. But of course, language acquirers should understand most of it. It's also, number 2, optimal input is extremely interesting, very interesting. The word I like to use for this is compelling. Compelling input is so interesting, you temporarily forget that it's in another language. If input is comprehensible and compelling, you won't even notice the noise in the input, most likely. The next characteristic. Optimal input is rich. This is characteristic number 3. It's rich in language that contributes to the message and the flow of the story or text. The language included in the input also gives the reader support in understanding and therefore acquiring new parts of language. Big point. It is not necessary to make sure that certain grammar and vocabulary is there in the input. Rich input automatically includes new, unacquired language that acquirers are ready for. We've called this I+1. Number 4, quantity. It takes a lot of comprehensible, compelling, rich input to make real progress. Optimal input is therefore, we use the word abundant, which provides more opportunities for the acquisition of language. The result of getting out to optimal input is subconscious language acquisition. Language acquirers will be focused on the story, the message, and they will not always be aware that acquisition has happened. The knowledge will be represented subconsciously in their minds.
So it is a subconscious process. Oh, no. Okay. You didn't see that. Let me see what you saw. Good. All right. So according to Dr. Krashen, number 1, we acquire language from speaking and listening. Based on what you heard, is that true or false? Number 1, true or false? According to to Dr. Krashen. Number 2, optimal input doesn't have to be meaningful. Is that true or false? Okay, Jovan is saying false to number 1. Consuelo, false. Number 3, optimal input should focus on specific grammar and lexis. And number 4, optimal input is only necessary in small doses. All right, we're getting a lot of different answers. Please write the number and then T or F. Please write the number and then T for true or F for false. Now remember, we're basing our answers on what Dr. Krashen believes and said in the last 3-minute video. Okay, so let's take a look at the answers. They're all false, according to Dr. Krashen. According to Merrill Swain, number one would be true, but we didn't listen to Dr. Merrill Swain because Dr. Merrill Swain is the author of the output hypothesis. And according to that hypothesis, we do acquire language through speaking in interactive situations. But according to Dr. Krashen, we only acquire language through comprehensible input. Number two, optimal input doesn't have to be meaningful. We know that is not true by any means in any circumstance. Number three, optimal input should focus on specific grammar and lexis. No, he says it should be very rich, very diverse, should have a lot of variety of language. And number four, optimal input is only necessary in small doses. No, it should be provided in huge amounts in an ongoing basis. Okay, so this is the whole rationale behind optimal input, and this is what we have to consider when we are providing it to our students in class. Let's take a look at this situation here. Well, I'll take a minute here very quickly. I want you to tell me if you think the listening or reading texts are appropriate for their levels. Okay, so remember, if we're thinking about the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, A1 is elementary or basic, if you want to use that terminology. A2 is pre-intermediate. B1 is intermediate. B2 is upper intermediate. C1 is advanced, and then C2 is proficiency. So number one, live listening, a 5-minute lecture on rational decision-making versus decision-making by chance for a B1 level or intermediate level. So if you're looking at a language institute, it's somewhere around intermediate 1 to intermediate 5 or 6, depending on the length of the program. Number two, article on New York as a vacation spot for a B1 level class. Is that appropriate or not appropriate? Number three, email from someone writing to a friend for an A2 level. Is that appropriate or not appropriate? And finally, four, an article on new technologies coming in the future for a B2 level. Appropriate or not appropriate? This is very important because it can have a direct impact on your students' ability to participate and to learn from the input. If we choose the wrong lecture or the wrong type of input, the students will not process the information and therefore they will not be able to use it. In other words, they won't be able to talk about it or write about it. And obviously they won't, because they haven't understood most of it. So we want to make sure we use the right input. Number one, is that appropriate, A, or not appropriate, N? Okay, Roger has not appropriate and then appropriate for the other three. All right, so the correct answer is number one is not appropriate because the topic is too high in difficulty and complexity. Numbers 2, 3, and 4 are appropriate because they're consistent with what we can provide, what the students are expected to be able to learn and do at their respective levels of proficiency according to the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. So number one is live listening, rational decision-making versus decision-making by chance. That is here. That is not here. So this is not the right topic to use with intermediate level students who are just beginning, B1. This is more appropriate for B2. And if you really want to take advantage of that topic, then it's probably better for even C1, but not for B1. This is too complex for B1. That's why somewhere out there, there's a class where they talk about that topic and the students really don't demonstrate in the learning outcomes that they understood. So here, for example, we're talking about global warming. We want our students to tell us what we want. Stephanie, what is global warming? And Stephanie's going to tell me what global warming is. Elva, what about you? Elva's going to give me her opinion. Leonardo's going to tell me why it is a problem. Fanny's going to give me an explanation as to why it's a problem. Marilee is going to tell me why it's a problem. And then Helen is going to tell me what is being done about it. And Ellie is going to tell me what is being done about it. And then Marco Hirong is going to tell me how it affects him or his family or his country, right? And so I get different pieces of information from my entire class. I want everybody to tell me something about the listening so that I am absolutely sure they really did understand what they heard on the audio or what they heard from me if it's a live listening. That is the only real way you can tell if your students did understand the input. Checking off answers in a textbook, A, B, C, D, doesn't really tell you if they understood. If they did it on a platform, on an LMS, you would have to go into the system and check all of the listening activities and see how many of your students got most of them correct. If you don't do that, you have no idea, really. Because if you think about it, in a physical class, what did we always do? We called on one student and another and another. Okay, so Helen, what is number one? Helen said A, correct. In a traditional class, I don't work like that. But anyway, this is just to give you an example. Julia, what about number two? Number two is C, teacher. Good, very good. Ellie, number three. Number three is B. Okay. But what about the rest of the class? Did you check to see how many of them got the answers correct? Did they really understand? No. So the only real way to tell, the only real way to ascertain if your class understood the listening or the reading is to ask them questions. Have them tell you about it in detail, elaborate, give you the language that they're in a position to give you so that you can be absolutely sure when you've heard from all of your students that they did understand the content. That is the only real way to know. Okay, so again, a reading and a listening. For time's sake, I'm going to go through this. The first thing you always do is you always engage your students. And I'm going to say this again. You always engage your students with a discussion, a video, brainstorming, whatever, but you must engage your students with the topic of the reading or the listening. That is the first thing you do. This is what we call a standard procedure. So, of course, we encourage creativity when we work with our students and with our teachers. We want teachers to be creative. We want teachers to introduce variety. But there's always a standard procedure. There are things that you can't negotiate. So you must, when you're working with a reading or listening, you always have to engage your students first. If you don't engage your students, if you don't activate their background knowledge, they will not be interested in the reading or the listening. Therefore, they will not benefit. They will not understand. They will not want to understand. They will not process the information, and therefore they will not be able to do anything with it. So this is important because this appears on a variety of international tests. Then you do pre-teaching or predicting as an optional step. Silent listening. The exercises come here, top down, bottom up processing. Top down is the main idea. Bottom up is listening for details. And in the post listening or post reading, you almost always have a speaking or a writing task that is personalized. And I'm going to say this again because it's going to appear on your international tests and on your ministry tests. They want you to be familiar with your standard procedure because this will appear on their tests. You have to know what goes first, what usually goes second, why it is in that order. And so you have to know the sequence. And usually the last step is a personalized speaking or writing activity. Okay? So we're getting to the end. When you are in a class observation, all of this comes together. Why? We talked about aims and outcomes and planning and procedure and evaluation and what you should do and what you shouldn't do. All of this is important because it doesn't matter how many years you've been working in the field, you're always going to get observed by a coordinator or a supervisor. You will always be observed. And you want that observation to go well. You want, more specifically, you want the post-observation conference, or what we call the feedback session, to go back well. Okay? Good, Stephanie, that's right. So reading and listening to understand, and then Roxana, excellent, top-down is skimming, bottom-up is scanning. Roxana would know that. So if you are going to get together with a coordinator, remember purpose, support, and success. This is what will help you get through that feedback session in a very happy manner. Know the reason why you did everything, why everything happened. Support your explanations and focus on success, the indicators of success in terms of the learning outcomes, what your students did, how they responded, what they said, what they wrote, how they behaved, how they reacted, if they enjoyed the class. If you put all three together, if you know why you did this first and why you did that next, and every step of the way, what the purpose was for each teaching step, and you can provide support for your explanations, you're going to do great in your post-observation conference. Just to remind you, you know this from experience, the post-observation conference or feedback session always consists of the icebreaker that comes first, that is to relax the teacher. So the coordinator will try to relax you by engaging in some small talk. So for example, Karina, great to see you. So how are those studies? How are you doing with the masters that you're working on? Tell me about it. So Karina is going to tell me about her masters. Okay, great. Well, hey, listen, I'm very happy that you're making progress in your professional development. Okay, let's get to the class. And then the coordinator will invite you to remember the class from your perspective. And you should have an opportunity to tell your own story, what you remember from the class. Then the coordinator will come with some positive comments. And then usually the suggestions, if there are any, are reserved for last or next, excuse me, they come next. And then finally, you have a collaborative action plan, which is, hey, what do you want to work on? If it's only strengths, if everything worked out beautifully and the coordinator noticed some things that were really strong for you, then the coordinator might want you and the coordinator might agree to focus on one area you want to cultivate and maybe try in a different group. So if you did something with teenagers, try to adapt that for younger learners, all right? So that might be the collaborative action plan. But if it's an area for improvement, maybe your TTT was high, then maybe the focus will be on reducing your TTT and how that can be done for the next class, right? So this is the typical sequence for a feedback session. Now, before we get to the final part, which is about 5 minutes away, take a look at this class. These are the steps in a real lesson. The teacher gives a live lecture. Now, remember, we talked about listening activities, right? So usually in most cases, when we do a listening, the teacher will use an audio from the textbook or from the internet or from their own source. A live lecture is when the teacher is the audio. The teacher speaks. So the teacher might tell a story, or the teacher might read a script, or whatever it might be. So the teacher is the audio. Then the students summarize what they heard from the teacher in pairs or groups. They will come together and they say, well, the teacher said this, and then this happened next, and so on. Then the teacher gives out a worksheet so that the students write sentences with words and phrases from the lecture. Okay, so now the teacher gives everybody a piece of paper, and on the piece of paper, they have to write sentences with words and phrases from the lecture. Okay? As they're writing their sentences, the teacher circulates the check on the student's work and gives support if needed. And then the teacher goes over the students' examples, calling on each one. Okay? Finally, there's a discussion on the topic of the live lecture where the students give their views. Okay. So this is the summary of the sequence of the lesson. We have 6 steps. I'd like you to tell me as many as you can in 2 minutes. Try to match the step, the teaching step, with the aim or the purpose. Okay? try to match the teaching step with the aim of or the purpose. Let's do the first one together. Number 1, the live lecture. Was the live lecture A, to confirm students understand segments of the lecture? B, to confirm students grasp main and supporting ideas? C, to provide students with support? D, to prepare students to use the target language next? E, top-down and bottom-up processing? Or F, to provide input in the L2? So what do you think? We'll do the first 4. We'll do the first 4. Good. So the first one is F, to provide input in the L2. What about summarizing in pairs or groups? Okay, Orieta says 2 is A. How many agree with Orieta? 2 is A. Kadri, okay, you got it. You get the hang of it. So I want to. It's important that we understand every teaching step has a reason or a purpose. This is important when you plan your lessons. This is important when you're teaching your lessons. This is important when you meet with your coordinator and you explain why you did different things. And this is important when you take your tests, whether it's with the ministry or with Cambridge's TKT or some other test. They're going to ask you about the aims. They're going to ask you, why did the teacher do this, or why is this good? Okay. So let's take a look. What about teacher tests? What should I keep in mind? Okay. So aims. Okay, you've got the aims, teaching procedure. Okay, key principles and concepts. What are some of the strategies that you can use? Focus on keywords and phrases. Focus on the standard procedure. What do we normally do in these situations? What is your own experience? What is the best thing to do in that situation? What is the worst thing to do in that situation? Aims or purpose. What, again, aims and purpose. Why are we doing, or why is this being done? What is the inherent meaning in the examples that are being given in the question, and also the answer alternatives? Odd man out. Usually you'll have 2 options that are very similar and one that's very different. That very different one can very well be the right answer, even if you don't know it. If you don't know you don't read the rest. If anything looks significantly different from the other 2 options, that's probably the right answer. And you also have the 50-50 strategy, which is eliminate one of the 3 options so that you only have 2. Thereby, you increase your chances of finding the right answer to 50%. So you have 1 in 2 chance of getting the right answer. Let's look at this from the TKT. Okay, we have a few minutes left. Okay, we'll be done in about 10 minutes. So look at number 1. So here we're going to match the instructions in the textbook with the aims on the right. So we have 6 instructions in the textbook on the left, and we have 7 options on the right. Let's look at number 1. Use the words and phrases to produce a paragraph about yourself. Use the words and phrases to produce a paragraph about yourself. A, is that to provide controlled written grammar practice of recently taught language? B, to personalize recently taught vocabulary through a writing activity? C, to give students practice in identifying details in the listening text? D, to give students practice in oral fluency? E, to provide practice in reading for specific information? And F, to provide practice in reading for general understanding? And finally, G, to provide practice in process writing. Let me tell you a couple of tips. Number one, always find words here that will indicate to you, for example, is number one reading, listening, speaking, or writing? Again, is number one a reading, speaking, listening, or writing task? Good, Catherine. So it's a writing test. So we can eliminate C, we can eliminate D, we can eliminate E, we can eliminate F. So we only have A, B, and C, excuse me, A, B, and G. So the correct answer, if you see another keyword, yourself, when you write about yourself, you're usually personalizing, and we're talking about words and phrases. Are we talking about grammar or vocabulary? We're talking about vocabulary. So in A, B, or G, where do you see writing, personalization, and vocabulary? We see it in B. To personalize recently taught vocabulary through a writing activity. Okay? So we have to use the key words to eliminate options that we shouldn't pay attention to, and we focus on the options where we will have the right answer. Okay? Let's look at number 2. We'll do the first 3 for time's sake because I want to finish on time here. Use the train timetable to find the best train for each family to catch. Look at the language here. Use the train timetable or schedule, and if you want to use British English, schedule, to find the best train. So the best train, is this a speaking, reading, listening, or writing? This is a reading activity, so we can eliminate, well, B is eliminated because we use it already. A, we eliminate its grammar. C, we eliminate its listening. D is a speaking. So the answer is E or F, because these are the only ones that are reading activities, E or F. So which one is it? Number 2 is E or number 2 is F? Roger says E. Isabel says E. Fanny says E. Excellent. The correct answer is E because we are looking at different trains. We must find the best train. That means we need to look for specific information, not general understanding. General understanding is the main idea. So the correct answer for number 2 is E. We must find the best train. That means we have to look at all the different trains and choose one. That is specific information. Okay? All right, good. That's to give you an idea. Let's take a look at another one over here, 56 and 57. Now let's jump straight to the other one. Let's jump straight to the ministry questions here. So, okay, so this is from a ministry test, and look at this. Look at this question here. It's very interesting. After listening to the conversation, one student raises his hand and asks, "Teacher, what are cues? Which of the following actions is it more appropriate for Manuel to carry out?" So here, what do we have here? The student wants to know the meaning of the word cues. The student doesn't know the meaning of the word cues. So when a student doesn't know the meaning of a word, we have to provide the meaning. That's the purpose. So what do we normally do? What is the standard procedure? What would you do? That's what you have to ask yourself. So A, tell the student the definition of cue in English. If he doesn't understand it, translate the word cue into Spanish. Would you do that? Is that something you would do? Is that something you would consider? B, explain to the students that cue is a British word and its synonym in American English is row, which is not true. Ask the student if he got the idea or not. synonym. Is that effective? Is that going to clarify the meaning for the student? What is the most effective option? C, ask for students to come to the front and line up one behind the other. Ask the whole class what their peers are doing and where people usually stand like that. Learning styles. So what would you do? A lot of people are putting C, and C is the correct. We have to say C to C. C is the correct answer because here we don't do this, do we? That's the lazy approach. Number one, do we ever really just simply translate a word? We don't do that. We haven't done that in 30 years. We do a little more work to that. I know you guys do. You work harder than that. Nobody does that. So A, we can eliminate. Nobody does that. That's terrible. B, explain to the students that Q is a British word and its synonym in American English is a row. What if the student doesn't know what a row is? It's useless. It's not effective. The only possibility is C, okay? So that is what we do in the situation. Plus it's visual. Remember, when we talk about VAC, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, we must make sure that the activities that we carry out in class and the way we explain things and we approach things as teachers have to appeal to multiple learning style preferences, not just auditory, not just visual, but combining things. That's why when people give only verbal instructions or verbal explanations, many times students don't understand. They need a visual support to better understand or grasp the idea. That's why we have to, and it's even better we do kinesthetic, which is movement or touching, right? Or tactile activity. Let's do the last one. I promise this is the last one. Karina wants to help her students develop their productive skills through the topic free time activities. For that purpose, she has designed a teaching sequence divided into 3 steps. So keyword, first you have to identify the key terms. Key term here, free time activities, that's the topic, but we're focusing on productive skills. What are the productive skills? So anything that is not a productive skill. So we know that productive skills are speaking and writing. Very good, Marlene. Very good, Mirta. Speaking and writing. And so anything that is not productive here, we can eliminate immediately. So let's take a look here. So here it says, first, Karina wants to activate her students' prior knowledge on that topic. Prior knowledge. Prior knowledge. Given the teacher's purpose, which of the following activities is least appropriate? So Karina wants to activate the students' prior knowledge. This is something that we want to do first. How do we do it? A, play a video about free time activities that people usually do. Tell the students to identify the names of those activities and write them down in their notebooks. Call on some volunteers to share their answers. That's A. B, write free time activities on the board and tell the students to think of all the words they can relate to that phrase. Invite some students to go to the board and write the words they thought of. C, show the students some pictures of free time activities. Ask the students which of those activities and or others they do in their free time. Have them exchange ideas and then call on volunteers. Okay, so we want to activate students' prior knowledge. Which of the following activities is the least appropriate, the worst, no good? 2 of them will work, 1 of them will not. Which one is it? A lot of people are putting A. A. A is correct because in A, none of the ideas come from the students. In B and C, ideas do come from the students. So when we're activating prior knowledge, remember, ideas have to come from the students. So here, for example, free time activities on the board, and tell the students to think of all the words that can relate. This is a typical brainstorming activity. And then they go to the board and they write. So the information, the ideas come from the students. In C, the teacher shows the students some pictures of free time activities. Ask the students which of those activities and or others they do in their free time. This comes from the students. So this is also background knowledge, background knowledge. Here, there is nothing coming from the students. Everything comes from the teacher, from the video. So this is the least appropriate because it is not consistent with this. Odd man out, source of information, student versus the teacher or the video. Correct answer, A. Okay, to finish, 70% of what we do as teachers is based on habit. 30% on creative enterprise. This is from John Fanslow. So again, a lot of the things we do naturally, inherently by habit, it comes without thinking automatically because we've done it so many times. And then 30% of that time, we're always trying new things. We're experimenting, we're innovating, we're being creative, we're introducing variety. And so that is a healthy process. That is very good. That's very good for teachers. It's very good for students. That's how we grow, and that's how we adapt to an ever-changing world. And so it's very important that we keep that in mind. So if we really want to grow, we've been doing this, for example, with the virtual classes for about 1.5 years. It's going on 1.5 years. So the idea is that we continue growing, that we be aware of our strengths, that we self-assess, that we be aware of what usually works and why it works and what doesn't work, and we keep track of that. Okay? So I wish you a lot of luck. I hope that, you know, this whole tying in of the best practices and, you know, this framework, the please framework, making your students happy and making yourself very happy, can help you become more successful when you're teaching. And how everything comes together, really, when you think about it, everything that you plan for, everything that you work so hard to achieve with your students to help them succeed, also is important to consider when we get together with our coordinators and we're trying to work out the feedback session. We want the feedback session to be successful, to be a happy experience. We don't want it to be a negative one. And so in order to do that, it's best if you can tie all of these ideas together and focusing on the aims, knowing why you did this, why you did that, what's the reason, what was the outcome, the purpose, the success, the indicators, the support for your explanations. And then finally, all of that is going to help you on your tests, whether it's for the ministry, if you want to get named, right, or you want to get a promotion, or if you want to take an international exam as well on methodology, or you want to take an international course, a high stakes course, all of this is going to help you. So I hope that you found this helpful. And I certainly enjoyed my time with you. I believe we will have a few minutes for questions. And then after that, I think if we do what we did last time, I'll share some information very briefly, less than 5 minutes, about the MAS ELT program and how you can contact English teachers in Peru for more information on that. So thank you so much. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Rocio. Thank you, Joel. I see Joel and Humberto and everybody. Such kind words. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And here I am. I'm available for any questions that might arise.
Yeah, thank you so much, dear Leonardo. Now we are going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. It was an amazing webinar. And now please, Ms. Angela Salazar, can you read the questions for Mr. Mercado?
Yes, sure. Good evening.
Hi, Angela. Hello. Good to see you.
Thank you so much again. It's a pleasure for us to have you here. Not only a pleasure, an honor. And I have some questions for you. The first one is about planning. You know that sometimes when we plan, we have the idea that this lesson is going to be really interesting for our students and we're in love of it. But what happens is that sometimes our students find it not that exciting. And the question will be, what can we do when this is happening in the moment that we already have like everything planned, you have everything in your head, and these unforeseen problems come out. So what advice would you give us?
I think the first piece of advice that I would attempt to give is that we try to act preemptively. In other words, we try to anticipate the potential problem before it actually happens. I think in order to best assure that the content of our lesson or any particular activity is going to be engaging for our students, is that we do an ongoing needs analysis and assessment of how things are going in the course. In other words, it doesn't have to be a full-blown needs assessment, except at the beginning of the course when we're working with a new group or at the beginning of the school year, where we ask them questions about, what kinds of topics to like, what kinds of activities, and so on. We get as much information from each and every one of our students as possible so that we know where we kind of have to direct our efforts and make sure that the content is going to be relevant, but on an ongoing basis as well. Ask them every week, how did you like the activities we did? What kinds of contents or activities would you like to see next week? And so this is an ongoing process so that you can make sure that you can hone in on what will actually work better than perhaps run the risk that something like that will happen. Now, if you planned ahead and you thought that something was going to work and it doesn't, it's going to depend very much on the type of situation. If it's a listening or a reading activity, I think what probably usually works, especially with many in our audience who work with younger learners, up to teenagers, is try to make it into a game. Games usually work. They're the salvage. They're like the life vest for any type of situation that might go wrong. All kinds of students love games. Young learners, teenagers, and adults love games. And I've seen thousands of responses from needs analyses that we would do every month when I worked at Euridiomas. It was a standard procedure for all the teachers to run the needs analysis at the beginning of every course. So eventually we compiled thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of data on our students, and we knew what they preferred, what they liked, what they didn't like. And what they always liked was games. And when we observed classes, we saw that this was something that always worked. So if you think that something is not turning out okay, it's a listening that's not working, a reading that's not working, if it's a speaking, whatever it is, gamify it. So convert it into a game, put a little competition into it, have them work in groups. They can do this also now with the breakout rooms. They can work collaboratively. It doesn't change anything. Just because we're working online doesn't mean that our students can't work in pairs and groups. And put a little competitive taste into it. So ask them how many students, the group that will find the most new words related to whatever the topic is, maybe in the reading, or the students who can find 10 examples of verbs in the listening, or the students who can give the longest example or can include 6 examples of colors in their response. Whatever it is, you can introduce a wide variety of different criteria and make it fun and engaging. Just give it a creative twist. Make it a little unusual, right? You might want to put in some words like, make sure whatever you say includes the name of Miguel Grau in there. So people are like, wait a minute, how am I going to include Miguel Grau in there? Well, that's why you have to be creative, work together. How many of these 10 words can you put in your role play? And so try to make it into a game. And once you turn it into a game, usually you get your students back. It's even if you lost them for a little bit, if you gamify it and you put something fun into it, usually that should be enough. That should do the trick. I've seen it happen so many times when students have really enjoyed a game, or if the teacher had to improvise and switch to a gamification strategy, which is what we used to advise our teachers as well when we work with them and train them, that usually works. So that's what I would suggest. That's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Thank you so much. And I think, I'm sorry, my voice is dying, but I think that it will also help our kinesthetic students, right?
Yeah, no, but if it's in a physical classroom as well, of course, obviously, and in a virtual classroom, there's no reason why we can't gamify either. In fact, we have some more tools at our disposal. We want to convert something into a game. That goes back into the planning stage. So again, it's very important, as we know, to anticipate potential problems at every stage of our lesson. What happens if this doesn't work? We should ask this all the time. It's a lot of work, but at the same time, it can be very enriching if everything works out beautifully. We know how that feels when we have that magical class and everything has worked out so wonderfully well, and our students are really happy. So it is extra work, but we have to try to anticipate. We have to have a plan B, especially when we're not so certain about certain stages of our lesson. What if I think this reading is going to work, but I'm not so sure. In fact, you'll see that on examinations, for example. They'll make a distinction between, say, for example, an aim or a procedure or an assumption. And they talk about assumption on different exams, like the TKT, for example, or even on the ministry exams. They'll ask you, well, the person thinks this is going to happen. It's an assumption. But the assumptions don't always work out. So what do you do when it doesn't work out? So my first piece of advice would be gamify it. That usually works.
Thank you so much. Our next question is from Miss Viviana Manzanedo, who asks how to engage students who start learning English in a public school if their native language is not Spanish. Could you give us a tip?
Well, everybody to a certain extent is on the same level playing field, because whether your native language is Quechua or Aymara or Spanish, you're all learning the same second language. And so what you're trying to do, making some adjustments, of course, for cultural differences, depending on the situation or the place, the setting where you are in. So there's some adjustments that we do make to the contents of the lesson, depending on the cultural background of our students. That is by default. But in general, the idea that we try to use English or make adjustments depending on the level, even if they're pre-A1 and they're starting off at a very low level, they're all at the same level playing field. So two things here. Number one, if for any reason you are going to use the L1, now you have arguments in favor of the L1 or the native language, and arguments against the use of the L1 so early, even so early. Some people or some institutions prefer not to use the L1 at all, or as much as avoid using it as much as possible. In that case, all of the students, whether they're Aymara students or Quechua students or Spanish-speaking students, or whatever the native tongue is, they're all in the same position. Then nobody has an advantage over the other because everybody is being exposed to pure English, number one. And so in that particular case, in that situation, it's up to the teacher to make sure that all of them understand, making adjustments, accounting for the cultural and differences, right? But if you are going to use L1, then obviously you have to cater to each ethnic group or cultural background with the different cultural backgrounds equally. You can't make distinctions for preference for one or the other. You have to do your homework as a teacher. What is going to help my Quechua students or Aymara students understand this better if I have to make an adjustment in their L1? So even though I might not be a proficient speaker of Quechua or proficient speaker of Aymara, but I have to still do my work. That's where I am. That's where I work. So it's my responsibility to prepare myself and adjust my instruction and the content of my lessons so that I can make it easier for them to understand. So remember, we talk about schema theory, right? And schema theory says that things are easier to understand if we can connect a new language to the student's cultural background and life experiences. So that still applies regardless of whether you're in Lima or if you're in Andahuaylas or if you're in Puno or wherever you might be, or in Iquitos or in Puerto Maldonado. Or on the border. You have to make the adjustments to make sure that whatever you're teaching connects to the cultural background and life experiences of your students. So if it's a rural setting, then make the adjustments so that they can understand it better. If it's a more urban setting, or if it's in a provincial setting, again, try to include elements from their own experiences and their own cultural background so that it's easier to understand. So before we saw some examples from a general Peruvian perspective, right? We looked at Puno and cold, and we didn't say Arequipa, we saw Iquitos, hot, we saw Gaston Acurio. You want to make it easier, then look for the local celebrities and local protagonists, right? So, for example, the singer Luna. I know he's a good singer, but I think he's a Ayacuchano. But anyway, you want to use William Luna, there we go. And you want to do your homework. And what's going to work better? If I try to use somebody like Pedro Suarez Vértiz, he might not work so well in some places in Peru. Let me use some local celebrities. So we have to constantly be adjusting it so that we can make that connection and help them understand. And of course, the younger they are, we have to simplify it, make it more digestible and more kinesthetic. Kinesthetics always apply to young learners whenever we're in a physical environment. And if we're in a virtual environment, of course, we want to maximize participation and again, try to account for those differences. So that's what I would say. In general terms, she's concerned, and I understand this. She's concerned about whether we can engage our students from the very beginning, because if we don't, they're not going to be very interested in learning English. And this happens in so many different aspects. It happens with reading. It happens with so many other things. Our first experience has a profound impact on whether we will want to do it throughout the rest of our lives or not. That's why a lot of people have a negative view on reading, because usually their first impression of reading is negative, because in schools, a lot of schools, even in the US, they still work very traditionally, and they force you to read something you don't really want to read. So you don't have a sense of choice. You read something you don't like. And so eventually you start growing up not liking reading. And so the same thing happens with language. If you're working with little children in a rural setting, provincial setting, urban setting, wherever you are, the main mission is the same. You must make sure that the first experience is as positive as possible, that your students are happy, that your students enjoy it, that they don't see it as something alien or something intrusive, but rather something that they look forward to experiencing again and again. And that's going to happen especially if they're young learners, the time they spend learning English is a lot of fun and they can do something with it. And when they go home, and this is what I used to do at ETiP, because we used to have a program called, and we did this at Idiomas too. It was called Family Time. And what we did was we got the parents involved. So the parents, when the child went home, the child had to show the parents something that they learned at the institute. So the parent had to give feedback, or the parent had to do an activity with the child. Very simple. It didn't matter if the parent knew English or not, but they worked on something together. So it bonded the child and the parent, or the parents. And so that reinforced the child's willingness to learn English from a very early age. We did this systematically with thousands of children. We did this. It was called Family Time. At least at Idiomas, it was called Family Time. I don't remember what it was called at. I don't remember what we called it at Libna, but the program was getting the student and the young learner and the parent coming together, sharing an experience in English. And that simple recognition, because normally, parents are working, they don't have time. So we created the space where the parent could come together with the child, and the child felt so motivated. My mother heard me use English at home, and then they came to class, and we invited the parents to come to the classroom. So the parent was invited to come to see the child perform in class for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever it was. And that reinforced the bond, the parent-child bond, and it motivated the young learner to want to learn more English, because they felt proud that their parents were there to see them. And they also felt proud that at home they could share that moment of English with mom or dad. So those are the things that if you can do. We did it systematically with thousands of students, and we did it with a great deal of success. So I would say that from a very general perspective, try to make that initial experience as positive and as enjoyable as possible, and the child will want to look forward to learning more and more English over time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your answer. And I think that it will also, as you were saying, in a way improve our students' autonomy. It will make them try to do their best to learn, to be there. So I think I really enjoyed your answer and made me think a lot more.
Much. Thank you.
So thank you once again for being here tonight, for sharing all your experiences and for sharing all your knowledge. And I want to invite you to stay here for a bit longer with us.
By all means.
Yes, to continue with the next part.
Of course.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, dear Leonardo. Thank you so much, dear Angela. Leonardo, can you share maybe your information about your ELT program?
Of course, by all means. Let's see, let's take a look and let's jump back in here.
Ajá, si tuvieras la información, Leonardo, para que no quede dudas, porque a veces
en castellano.
cuando quedan dudas nos abordan los mensajes a todo el equipo de administradores y por ahí para que no quede ninguna duda.
Por supuesto. En términos generales, nosotros ofrecemos cursos para profesores y coordinadores dentro de lo que es el rubro de la enseñanza y de aprendizaje del idioma inglés. Por otro lado, también ofrecemos plataformas para el aprendizaje del inglés de última tecnología, autodidactas. Entonces, uno puede tener acceso a diferentes tipos de contenidos que le permiten desarrollarse en cuanto a sus 4 habilidades. Tenemos exámenes internacionales que ya estamos administrando, donde el docente puede tomar un examen desde la comodidad de su hogar. No tiene que ir a un laboratorio, ya lo hemos administrado. Es más, yo que he administrado miles de exámenes para Cambridge y para ETS, etcétera, etcétera, Michigan, en ambientes físicos, en auditorios enormes, yo puedo decir que es más seguro y más sencillo administrar exámenes vía, digamos, modalidad virtual, donde el candidato puede tomar su examen desde la comodidad de su casa, desde su escritorio, desde su dormitorio, donde desee tomar el examen. Entonces, empezando
Leonardo,
por
antes que pasemos sobre ese tema, porque yo sé que lo van a preguntar después. Con respecto al examen que nos estás mencionando, es un examen internacional que valida todos los skills en el idioma inglés, que está de acuerdo al marco común de referencia europeo. Son cosas que a veces siempre les interesan a los teachers. De repente, si nos puedes un poquito dar...
Sí, lo tengo acá en la presentación. Voy a llegar a ese resumen y bueno, cualquier cosa que quede pendiente lo puedo aclarar. Empezando con el programa Más ELT, que es el programa más amplio que hemos lanzado hace poco, incluye 3 cursos internacionales autodidactas en inglés que permiten mayor flexibilidad para que los docentes puedan estudiar al ritmo que más consideren conveniente. El programa viene con hasta 4 certificados más 1, es decir, 4 internacionales, en el sentido de que por cada curso internacional viene con un certificado y asimismo por los 3 cursos internacionales en su conjunto hay otro certificado de 180 horas, 60 horas por curso individual y 180 horas por tomar los 3 cursos. Además, hay la posibilidad de tomar un examen oral con la Universidad City University of New York. Ya varios docentes han mostrado su interés en tomar ese examen oral y ese sería una 5ª certificación internacional que se puede recibir dependiendo de la preferencia del docente. Hay un proyecto, hay una serie de webinars que se concentran en las competencias y los temas desarrollados, identificados por el Ministerio de Educación para lo que es el proceso de nombramiento, el proceso de también ascenso, equivalen a un total de 20 horas académicas. Todas las sesiones de webinar son conmigo. Los contenidos...
contigo, todas.
Sí, conmigo, íntegramente conmigo, ¿no? Ojalá que lo trato de hacer interesante para que no se aburran, a pesar que es la misma cara. Digamos, los cursos están alineados con Equals, con CA, los estándares de Equals, CA y TESOL International. Nuevamente vemos contenidos para exámenes, como hemos visto una pequeña muestra hoy día, ¿no? Contenidos para TKT, para otros exámenes. Definitivamente la concentración principal es los exámenes del Ministerio de Nombramiento y Ascenso. Y también hay un certificado de 230 horas para aquellos que terminan los 3 cursos internacionales, que asisten a los webinars y hacen un proyecto, ¿no? Hay un certificado en conjunto de 230 horas, ¿no? Entonces, son temas bastante relevantes, modernos, y bueno, ha sido un proyecto bastante exitoso con los docentes que hemos llevado, que son un buen número, ¿no? Los cursos de Caprica Education, que tiene sede en Estados Unidos, ofrecen cursos para docentes de inglés como también coordinadores, ¿no? Los cursos, como mencioné anteriormente, ofrecen un certificado de 60 horas por curso, altamente interactivos. Hay un certificado de 180 horas por aquellos que terminen dentro del programa de Más ELT 3 cursos, y posteriormente hay otros cursos que van a salir que pueden completar 300 horas y llevan 5. Y en el caso de los cursos en sí, que el formateo no salió muy bien, pero tenemos Speaking and Listening, Language Assessment, Language Forms, que es Grammar, Vocabulary and Pronunciation. Y también tenemos el Bundle, ¿no? Que es el 3 en 1, que prácticamente todos han optado por el Bundle, ¿no? Que es el conjunto de los 3 cursos.
Completo, ¿no?
Sí, entonces acá vemos algunos contenidos bastante prácticos, hay videos de clases, entrevistas con profesores de todo el mundo, los certificados en sí que vienen con cada curso. Tenemos también la plataforma que mencioné anteriormente, que es para inglés, para aquellos que desean estudiar inglés. Tenemos la plataforma ABA, ¿no? Que tiene videos, es
¿Y está
una
por
metodología.
niveles también? Como
¿Perdón?
el MSR,
Por niveles. Por niveles, desde el pre-A1 hasta el nivel C1. Entonces, desde el principiante hasta el nivel avanzado, uno tiene el acceso al nivel al cual está clasificado según el examen de clasificación, pero también tiene acceso a los otros contenidos si quiere repasarlos, ¿no? Una vez que uno sí, tiene acceso a los otros contenidos
a todos
también.
Los contenidos. Perfecto.
Y
Hay un placement test.
Hay un placement test, hay un placement test. Hay contenidos adicionales que se renuevan semanalmente. Hay podcasts, hay eventos en vivo que uno puede asistir, hay música, hay la letra, todo lo que es música, todo tipo de videos, grabación de voz, pronunciación, vocabulario, bastante completo. Es un programa bastante completo que estamos ofreciendo ahora y bueno, como pueden ver es bastante fácil de usar, una interfaz muy moderno y bueno, se trabaja mucho con videos, como mencioné anteriormente. Tiene clases de gramática también grabadas con subtítulos en inglés o castellano, como desee, como también los videos con el input también en inglés y castellano, ¿no?
¿Y cada nivel, una vez culminado, se certifica por la plataforma o qué tipo de certificación se hace?
Claro, con completar cada nivel viene con su certificado correspondiente a través de la plataforma.
Ah, ya, perfecto.
Y acá justo están los exámenes que se mencionaron anteriormente. Hay exámenes para todos los niveles, obviamente acá nos preocupamos más por los exámenes para adultos, para profesores de inglés, pero también hay exámenes para niños, ¿no? O sea, cubre todos los niveles, computarizado por computadora, resultados en 5 a 7 días. Ya hemos estado enviando certificados, ahora último, donde los profesores felizmente han tenido un excelente rendimiento en los exámenes, han pasado, han aprobado. Todos los resultados están alineados con el marco común europeo. Entonces hay resultados de acuerdo a cada habilidad, ¿no? Speaking, writing, listening, y también lo que es el language use, que comprende normalmente lo que es gramática, vocabulario, ¿no? El certificado es internacional, proviene de Londres y se puede tomar desde la casa, ¿no? Entonces, como mencioné anteriormente, desde la comunidad de la casa no tiene que uno desplazarse. Es la primera entidad internacional de exámenes internacionales de inglés que permite esta modalidad y como lo vuelvo a repetir, yo que he manejado tantos exámenes a través de los años, nunca he visto una modalidad tan segura como esta. De verdad es bastante segura, ¿no? Se puede moderar de manera directa, pero con la tranquilidad del caso porque el moderador está en el background, ¿no? Ni se ve. El candidato se enfoca nomás en su examen con la mayor tranquilidad y uno ve, pues, ¿no? Las grabaciones y lo demás, que los candidatos están perfectamente cómodos tomando sus exámenes y haciendo lo posible para pasarlo, ¿no? Y también tenemos lo que es el 5-Star Approach, que es un curso que comprende exámenes internacionales, como también la plataforma, videoconferencias, etcétera. Ahorita estamos a punto de lanzar un programa bastante corto. Antes era de 1 año, ahora vamos a ofrecer la modalidad de 4 meses y 8 meses. 4 meses para aquellos que están muy cerca de alcanzar el nivel que necesitan para pasar su examen internacional y 8 meses para aquellos que necesitan un poquito más de tiempo para consolidarse, ¿no? Entonces, digamos, esos son los programas generales que nosotros tenemos. Y bueno, agradezco muchísimo el tiempo que se me ha ofrecido para poder explicar un poco sobre las opciones que ofrecemos para los docentes de inglés. Nosotros nos dedicamos con mucha dedicación, mejor dicho, nosotros nos dedicamos con mucho empeño, mucha felicidad poder trabajar en conjunto con profesores de inglés, es lo que nos alegra muchísimo. Y bueno, así como esta noche he disfrutado mucho del momento que he pasado con tantos excelentes profesores, nosotros y yo mismo cuando participo directamente lo hacemos también con el mismo esmero. Así que estamos a disposición de todos ustedes y nuevamente agradezco la oportunidad de estar en este evento tan importante para la
Muchísimas
comunidad en el Perú.
gracias. Gracias, Leonardo, realmente por siempre estar con la disposición de aceptar la invitación que te hacemos desde la comunidad de English Teachers in Perú. Muchísimas gracias porque realmente todas estas son opciones a las que a veces, yo te diré, no todos los docentes podemos acceder. No, el Perú es un país muy diverso y no todos tenemos las mismas oportunidades por las zonas en las que nos solemos ubicar, ¿no? Hay docentes que están en ciudad, docentes que están en zonas donde generalmente a veces en el área de inglés son limitadas las capacitaciones o cursos, y mucho más si son de calidad o si son internacionales, ¿no? El hecho que nosotros tengamos la oportunidad de tener como oferta este tipo de programas, por ejemplo, la certificación internacional, la certificación en todos los skills es algo que hace mucho tiempo muchos teachers, ¿no?, nos han consultado a nosotros mismos porque el mismo Ministerio de Educación, cuando ofrece algunas becas o algunos cursos, pide un mínimo de nivel, ¿no?, de acuerdo al MSR, el B1 o el B2, dependiendo del tipo de beca que está dando, ¿no? Y es muy importante para todos nosotros tener ese certificado, y no todos podemos hacerlo porque generalmente si tú vas a postular a uno de Cambridge u otros, tienes que estar en la ciudad o tienes que ver las fechas o estar en la zona, tienes que moverte, además de los costos que sí, ¿no?, en ese caso son algo elevados, y tener esta posibilidad es importante, ¿no? Y hay una variedad de posibilidades ahí. Muchísimas gracias por compartirlo con toda la comunidad. También por ahí hay varios teachers de nuestra comunidad que están en el programa Más CLT, que han estado ahí felices, están muy contentos con el programa de preparación de nombramiento, ascenso que están llevando. Muchísimas gracias también por darles siempre esa oportunidad de poder seguir formándose y poder seguir fortaleciendo su desarrollo profesional, estimado Leonardo. Realmente gracias de corazón de parte de toda la comunidad.
De verdad que quisiera terminar con decir que la motivación principal que siempre he tenido a nivel personal y obviamente NYC tiene a nivel de empresa es hacer una contribución al desarrollo profesional de tantos excelentes profesores que aman a su profesión en el Perú. Eso debería ser la motivación principal, sobre todas las otras cosas, contribuir de alguna manera al avance del país y al avance en el desarrollo profesional de tantas excelentes personas. Y bueno, eso siempre va a ser algo que vamos a tener como prioridad, ¿no? Tanto yo de manera personal como también a nivel de empresa. Así que agradezco mucho nuevamente la oportunidad de estar acá.
Muchas gracias, gracias. Creo que nos une también eso en común, a la comunidad y a tu persona, el tratar de ver la manera de poder apoyar, sobre todo en la calidad educativa que nosotros brindamos, que finalmente llega a nuestros estudiantes, que es
Claro
lo que
que
queremos,
sí,
¿no?
claro que
Muchas
sí.
gracias, Leonardo.
Gracias.
Ahora sí, estimados teachers, pasamos, nos acompañas por favor, Leonardo,
Claro.
para el cierre, gracias. Pasamos ya tenemos aquí, han fijado por si acaso, creo que ya está fijado también el formulario, si es que desean mayor información sobre los cursos que ha mencionado Mr. Mercado o lo que fuera, ya han dejado fijado un formulario para que puedan llenar, para que se les pueda enviar toda esta información, si es que así lo desean, de cualquiera de los cursos del programa de preparación o el que mencionó de certificación, todos los cursos. Ahora vamos a pasar a el Exit Ticket. Este es nuestro último webinar. Hemos querido cerrarlo con broche de oro con la presencia de Mr. Mercado. Estamos muy felices por todo el tiempo que han estado acompañándonos. Esperamos de todo corazón también que haya podido sumar cada una de estas citas que nos hemos dado los fines de semana, que haya podido sumar a su formación, estimados teachers. Y aquí lo tienen disponible por 15 minutos. No se alboroten que los 15 minutos cuentan una vez que se cierre el webinar. Y ya saben cómo inicia, siempre https://cut.ly/ las siglas de nuestra comunidad, ETiP, la I con minúscula de English Teachers in Perú, I con minúscula, acuérdense, y LAST, la L con mayúscula, LAST, webinar. y la W con mayúscula, todo lo demás en minúscula. Entonces tienen ahí ya el link para que lo puedan completar, por favor. Lo van a fijar seguramente también. Yo les pido que ya está fijado, lo acabo de ver ahorita, ya está fijado también para que puedan registrar su asistencia. Sí, lo completan para todos poder enviarles el material, poder enviarles también y tener sus datos para ver el tema también de las constancias de participación para cada uno de ustedes. Y pasamos ahora sí. El exit ticket. ¡Ay, Kurt! ¿Estás por ahí? Estimado Kurt. ¿Sí estás por ahí?
Sí, Marianita, acá
Está tu
estaba.
cámara activada porque no te veo, querido Kurt.
¿Cómo estás?
Querido Kurt, ¿me ayudas por favor a indicarles a todos los teachers qué es lo que hacemos con la información que se registra en el exit ticket? Porque dado que este es el último webinar, es importante mencionarles el tema de los materiales y el tema de la constancia, cómo es que les llega, porque no les llega por cada webinar. Eso es algo que tienen que entender. Ayúdame por favor con eso.
Ok.
Porque ya te robé ya el link, ya yo sé que tenías que darlo tú.
Me va a gustar que tú lo aclares mejor porque los datos ya se me salieron de la cabecita.
Perdóname, te he movido todo entonces.
Sí,
Me vas a ayudar después a
ya vas a
despedirnos
ver,
con todo el
ya vas a
equipo, a
ver
dar
después
nombre
de que
por
tú,
nombre.
ya
Lo
vas a ver.
vamos a dar los dos. Ya,
Ya.
querido Kurt, pero quédate ahí, no me dejes sola. Sí, por favor, todos los recursos de cada uno de los webinars se les envía al correo electrónico que ustedes registran en el exit ticket, siempre y cuando lo hayan llenado el día que se haya transmitido el webinar, ¿no? Por último, la constancia va a ser enviada dentro de unas 2 o 3 semanas. ¿Por qué razón? Porque tenemos que validar toda la data de asistencia y sumar las horas que ustedes han dispuesto para atender estos webinars, porque algunos han asistido de repente de los 14 a 10, a 12, entonces la cantidad de horas varía. Hemos dicho que debe de haber un mínimo de los 14, mínimamente deberían haber asistido y lo vamos a considerar ahora, por ahora sí, a unos 10 webinars para nosotros considerar su constancia con una cantidad de horas que a ustedes también les va a servir. A los que asistieron al ciclo de Summer Webinars, se les va a sumar las horas de ese ciclo de webinars a estas horas también. ¿Ok? Y si tienen cualquier duda, por favor, escriban también al correo de nuestra comunidad English Teachers in Peru @gmail.com. Listo. Ahora sí, Kurt, ¿me ayudas para que podamos despedirnos, que nos muestren la imagen de todo el super equipo de administradores que tenemos ahí? ¿Me ayudas? Tú empieza porque yo soy primerita. De izquierda a derecha, querido Kurt. Vamos a conocer rápidamente a todos los administradores de toda esta grandiosa comunidad.
Queremos agradecer pues a todos los administradores que están ahí pendientes, no solo de los grupos de WhatsApp, sino también de otras plataformas en redes sociales que estamos manejando, ya sea Facebook, YouTube y TikTok también tenemos. Y principalmente sacarnos el sombrero con Miss Mariela Condorena, quien es la que lidera esta maravillosa comunidad y también nos lidera a nosotros, ¿no? Y nos orienta sobre cómo administrar mejor nuestros grupos. También contamos con la presencia de nuestra administradora Kimberly Linares Acari, de Acari, Ángela Salazar de Arequipa, David Cuadros de Ayacucho, Jaime Luis Quispe de Cajamarca, Sulamita Chutien de Cajamarca, Oshin Flores de Camaná, Catherine Novoa de Chiclayo, Diana Chafloc de Chiclayo también, Pamela Salazar de Chiclayo, Nefty Fortes de Spain, me, Curvilela from Huancayo, Miriam Córdoba from Huancayo too, my partner, Maite Flores from Huacho, Rubén Rumi from Huánuco, Evelyn Pita from Iquitos, Mayra Ríos from Lima, Julie Miñones from Lima too, Daisy Apolinario from Lima, Julissa de la Cruz from Lima, Gabriel Bayona from Lima, Lilia Espinosa from Lima, José Ortega from Puno, and Tabitha Naya from Heaven, and Kevin Laura from Tacna, my brother.
Así es, y este es el gran equipo que está detrás de toda la transmisión y de la organización de estos webinars. Creo que teachers, queridos administradores, podemos encender nuestras camaritas. Sí, ya podemos encenderla todos, por favor, para podernos despedir el día de hoy. Hemos cerrado con broche de oro, con nuestro invitado de lujo, Mr. Leonardo Mercado, a quien una vez más agradezco de todo corazón a nombre de toda la comunidad, que siempre quedan contentos con cada una de sus presentaciones. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad de poder aprender mucho más, de poder seguir fortaleciendo nuestros conocimientos como docentes del área de inglés. Uno nunca, nunca, nunca deja de aprender. En cada momento de la vida siempre hay algo nuevo que aprender y nosotros como maestros somos quienes tenemos que estar ahí, siempre aprendiendo. Somos los primeros estudiantes de toda la vida. Bien, querido Leonardo, de repente unas últimas palabras para despedirnos esta noche de la comunidad.
Definitivamente, porque estamos 24 de julio, así que estamos a la vuelta de la esquina de alcanzar el bicentenario del Perú. Es una fiesta patria muy linda, muy especial, así que les deseo del fondo de mi corazón que lo pasen muy lindo con su familia y sus seres queridos, que sea algo maravilloso, que también aprovechen el descanso, porque tienen, me imagino, un pequeño descanso, y que sigan con todos los éxitos en la gran labor que están realizando a nivel nacional en beneficio de todos nuestros queridos alumnos y en beneficio del futuro del país, ¿no? Ustedes están haciendo algo tan importante que va a ayudar a que el futuro sea mejor, así que mis respetos y muchas gracias por estar presente esta noche. Lo mejor para ustedes.
Muchas gracias, Leonardo. Muchísimas gracias de parte de toda la comunidad. Bien, nos despedimos el día de hoy y hasta un próximo ciclo de webinars. Vamos a ver, recuerden que en el ETiP que tienen la preguntita ahí para sugerirnos qué tipo de temas desean, actividades, proyectos que nosotros de repente podamos innovar o iniciar o planear para todos ustedes. Nosotros siempre estamos con todas las pilas puestas para tratar de seguir aportando en nuestra formación. Se despide el día de hoy con ustedes, Mr. Kurt J. Vilela Matos, Miss Sulamita Chutden, Miss Ángela Salazar, Miss Miriam Córdoba Soto, Miss Kimberly Linares, Teacher Rubén Rumi, Miss Daisy Apolinario, Miss Pamela Salazar, Miss Maite Flores, Miss Mayra Ríos, Miss Nancy Catherine Novoa, que también ha sido panelista, ha sido speaker en uno de nuestros webinars. Miss Mayra ya está ahí, ya se le puede ver. Miss Lilia Espinosa, Miss Oshin Flores, Teacher José Ortega, que está detrás de toda la transmisión durante todo este ciclo de webinars. Bye, bye, teachers.